So I'm making one of these pieces in which the sole object is to make the 4 quarters of it, the 4 quadrants, different from each other. And yet I'm not simply dividing the piece into 4 sections and doing 4 separate pieces. So I'm starting with color. There's a lot of ways you could do this, but I'm starting with color. I'm starting with a color that I rarely use, which is this purple. Here's a bit of a gray with a bit of yellow in it. Now the colors don't have to clash, they just have to be different in each of the 4 quarters. So some of these colors will clash, of course, and some of them will be quite harmonious, and that doesn't matter. The only criteria for this project is that the 4 quarters be different. So I'm looking at which aspects of the piece can be different. Here's this sort of bubblegum pink. I'm going to put a little manganese blue. Ooh. Over this, and maybe take my brayer. Now some of these layers were dry, but it looks like there were some water droplets here. It looks like the red wasn't quite dry, so that's lifting a bit. Fine. Ooh, it's got some really interesting texture down there. So now that I'm looking at it, I'm looking at what's the same about the 4 quadrants? What's the same all over? And one thing I see is that my shapes, defined by the colors, really just have these straight edges. So, like maybe in one of the quadrants at least, or somewhere where it'll show up in a couple, I could make a curved edge. And speaking of edges, I have some hard edges and some softer edges. So I think I'm good in that respect. Try more of this bubblegum pink. Here, why not another curved edge over here? And then another thing I'm looking at is the size of the elements. I have varying sizes. I have this piece, this is smaller, that's even smaller. Why not make some even smaller pieces? So now I'm going to introduce some line. This is sort of a shape defined by a line. And because I know you'll ask, this is a Molotow 1-for-all acrylic premium paint marker. And I'm going to make another kind of line here. Using my knitting needle. And then I'm going to lift that. And while that's drying, I'm going to use my Pitt pen. I'll switch hands here to make some other lines over here. And I want these different from these lines up here and different from this scribble mark. So I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to try to be different. In fact, I'm going to cover that again with white paint just a little bit of it, and then use the brayer to spread that out a bit. That looks terrible. Oh well, this is not the point. The point isn't to make the piece beautiful. So I'm just going to say, oh, shut up, inner critic. I don't care if that looks terrible. It's different from other parts of the piece. Ta-da! Done it. All right. Here's another one I'm working on. Just thought I'd show you the start of it since I'm kind of approaching it a little differently. Putting on pretty loose paint. Doing a lot of lifting here. Now here's a way I never use a brush on its end. And what happened if I just tried that? Ugh, don't like it. Oh well. Now this, working with fairly wet paint, working kind of wet and wet, totally run the risk of getting muddy very quickly. So I'm going to hit that with a hairdryer before moving on.